Berlin, late in the 1980 seconds. A middle-aged man steps off a train, the sound of iron wheels fading behind him. His name is Wolfgang Templin. To his neighbors, he is just another East German citizen. But to the Stasi, one of the most feared secret police organizations of the Cold War, he is a target ward. Templin is not carrying a weapon. He is not working for the CIA, nor is he plotting to overthrow the socialist government. His crime is simply gathering small groups of people to discuss human rights. Yet in East Germany, the Stasi assigns at least 10 collaborators to watch him. They follow him to the bakery, listen in on his phone calls, intercept his letters, and even plan to seduce his wife to shatter his marriage. They don't want to imprison him that would risk turning him into a martyr. Instead, they deploy a darker weapon, Zersetzung. This is not only the story of one man under siege, it is the story of how an entire nation was transformed into a surveillance machine, where trust itself became a casualty. On October 7, 1949, a new state was born, the German Democratic Republic, East Germany. Under the shadow of the Soviet Union, its leaders promised a socialist paradise for the working class. But stability was fragile. Citizens protested the one-party rule, thousands fled west, and Moscow remained doubtful that a country with such a fascist past could be trusted to stand on its own. To protect the regime, East Germany built its shield and sword, the Ministry for State Security, the Stasi. At its helm rose Erich Mielke, a man hardened on the streets of Berlin and tempered by years of exile in Stalin's Soviet Union. He had already proven his loyalty by murdering 2 policemen in broad daylight decades earlier. Now, back in East Germany, Mielke vowed to create a secret police force so indispensable that the regime could not exist without it. At first, the Stasi used open terror, arrests, sham trials, and executions. But such brutality stained the image of socialism. East Germany wanted legitimacy, a reputation as a modern, progressive state. So the Stasi changed tactics. No longer public violence instead, secrecy, surveillance, and psychological warfare. The scale was staggering. By the late 1980s, East Germany had around 16 million citizens. Among them, 90,000 full-time officers and perhaps 200,000 unofficial informants, neighbors, co-workers, even family members. One informer for every 60 citizens, more than the Gestapo or the Soviet KGB ever achieved. It was not just a police force, it was a nation of informants. This is the world in which Wolfgang Templin tried to speak of human rights, a world where even a whisper in your bedroom might appear, word for word, in a Stasi file. Every morning at 6, the watch began. Outside Wolfgang Templin's modest apartment, a Stasi team waited. They logged the time he left, the stops he made, the people he met. At 7:30, he went to the bakery. At 9, he took a train across town. Every detail recorded, filed, coded. In Stasi reports, he was not even a man anymore. He was Central One. His mail was opened, his bank statements copied, his phone tapped. Neighbors, colleagues, even close friends might secretly be informants. Some did it for ideology, others for money, others under threat. One informant was instructed to infiltrate his discussion group on human rights, pretending to share his ideals. For years, Templin spoke freely with people who were reporting every word to the Stasi. But surveillance was only the first layer. The Stasi prided themselves on creativity. They installed microphones inside lamps and ceiling moldings, cameras hidden in radios, even bugs inside church confessionals. They collected scent samples, scraps of clothing, or a chair cushion where Templin had sat stored in jars for dogs to track later. They even sprayed radioactive dust on dissidents so they could be followed invisibly through crowds. Templin lived in a society where reality itself could not be trusted. A friend might be a spy, a stranger at a cafe might be an agent, and even the furniture in his home might have been rearranged while he was gone, just enough to make him doubt his own sanity. This was not surveillance as the world had known it. This was control through paranoia, designed to make every citizen feel naked before the state. When Wolfgang Templin founded the Initiative for Peace and Human Rights, the Stasi escalated. Surveillance was no longer enough. Now they launched Zersetzung, a campaign to dismantle his life piece by piece. It began with confusion. One day, a man appeared at Templin's shop with papers for a luxury car he had supposedly ordered. Templin had never signed such a contract. Soon, delivery men arrived with televisions, appliances, antiques, all in his name. When he refused to pay, threats followed. Weeks later, stranger packages came. Crates of parakeet food, tens of thousands of condoms, even hundreds of live chickens. His home became a circus of unwanted deliveries, draining his time, his money, his sanity. At the same time, whispers spread. Friends asked how he could afford his new apartment, a spacious flat with central heating. Was he working secretly for the regime? Others hinted that his wife might be unfaithful. Stasi Romeo agents were trained to seduce targets' partners, and they considered Regina, Templin's wife, a prime mark. The goal was not to kill him. It was to make him doubt himself, to isolate him from allies, to break his marriage, and to poison his reputation as a dissident. If people believed he was corrupt, if his family fractured, if he was exhausted by endless harassment, then his voice for human rights would fall silent without a single bullet being fired. This was psychological warfare perfected, the art of destroying a man's credibility, his relationships, and his mind, until nothing remained but silence. The pressure did not stop. Eventually, the Stasi took the final step. Wolfgang and his wife Regina were arrested. There was no trial, no verdict, only a decision handed down in silence exile to West Germany. Worst of all, their children were taken from them and placed in state custody. For Wolfgang, it was the sharpest wound of all. He was not alone. Across East Germany, countless others suffered the same fate. Dissidents lost their jobs overnight. Families broke apart under the weight of suspicion. Some victims returned home to find their clocks reset, their refrigerators replaced, their furniture shifted slightly just enough to make them question their own memory. Others learned too late that their spouses, their closest friends, even their children had been filing reports on them for years. The consequences were devastating. Depression, paranoia, and alcoholism spread through the population. Suicide rates in East Germany stood far higher than in the West. The Stasi had discovered a new way of warfare, not against armies or nations, but against the human spirit itself. For Wolfgang, the exile meant safety from daily harassment, but not peace. The Stasi continued to track him across the border, reminding him that their reach was long and their patience infinite. By 1989, the tide had turned. The Berlin Wall, once the symbol of an unbreakable state, began to crack under pressure. Protesters filled the streets, demanding freedom, and the Stasi, once feared as untouchable, found themselves powerless against the roar of a nation. Wolfgang Templin and Regina returned from exile as witnesses to history. This time, they were not outlaws, but participants in the birth of a new, democratic Germany. Yet the fall of the wall brought not only joy, but also shocking revelations. After unification, millions of East Germans requested access to their Stasi files. What they discovered shattered them. Whispered conversations recorded word for word, medical histories cataloged, every movement logged. But the most painful discovery was the names. Trusted friends, neighbors, colleagues, even spouses had acted as informants, betraying them in silence for years. East Germany became known as a nation of informants. The betrayal of trust deeper than prisons, deeper than exile, left wounds that would never fully heal. Families were broken not just by the regime, but by the knowledge that intimacy itself had been weaponized. For Wolfgang Templin, the files confirmed what he had long suspected. He had been surrounded by spies, sometimes 4 in a single meeting. His life had been dissected, cataloged, and manipulated with precision, all in service of a collapsing system that could not survive the truth. When the Cold War ended, Erich Mielke, the architect of the Stasi's empire, finally faced justice. Yet he was tried only for the murders of 2 policemen committed decades earlier, not for the psychological destruction of tens of thousands of citizens. His grave, defaced within hours of his burial, became a symbol of the hatred left behind. For the survivors, the scars ran far deeper. Victims of Zersetzung carried lifelong trauma, insomnia, distrust, broken families, fragile hearts. Many, never recovered. Even decades after unification, some could not shake the suspicion that every glance, every word, was still being monitored. Germany today stands as one of the most privacy-conscious nations in the world, a direct response to the suffocating surveillance of its past. But remembrance is not only about caution, it is about honoring those who resisted, however quietly. Wolfgang Templin's life is proof of resilience, a man who endured harassment, exile, and betrayal, yet returned to help rebuild his country on principles of democracy and human rights. The story of the Stasi reminds us of a truth far darker than prison walls or barbed wire, that when trust is destroyed, when fear seeps into families, a nation can become its own prison. In this silent war, no bullets were fired, yet lives were shattered, and generations were marked. In the history of power and control, not everyone survives, but everyone leaves a trace,